Hello everyone, it's Gaz here from What Would the Smart Party Do, the UK's premier RPG podcast, and also one half of Unconventional GMs, the YouTube channel where we play one-shots and short-form games with vim and vigour in 2 hours or less. We've got a selection today of wonderful guests, podcasters, broadcasters, streamers and bloggers. We're going to talk about prepping games for one-shots, for conventions, for online games, for all kinds of things. But let me hand over to one of the other team we've got together. Craig, how's things going over there?
Doing just good, Gaz. I get a chance to be a guest on 2 of my favorite shows, which is exciting. I'm looking forward to talking about this. This is something I've actually taught this approach at conventions before, and it's something that people ask me about because I am constantly learning new games. And I think one of the things that we often hear is a reluctance to try out new games is getting past this point and understanding it. So hopefully we'll encourage people to play more than one game and realize that there's a lot of really good systems out there.
Excellent. Yeah, and I'm also on the panel. I'm Guy. I'm one half of Unconventional GMs. I also blog about one-shot RPGs and longer form stuff at burnafterrunningrpg.com. And I'm really excited about this as well. As we speak, some of us are mid-convention prep to try and get a load of games sorted out. And there's always that thing about when a new game lands, how do you actually get it to the table? What steps do you take? And I think sometimes it's one of those gaming things that isn't elucidated that well. Like, everyone does it, but there's not a step-by-step. With a few exceptions that we might get onto later in games, there's not really that sort of step-by-step thing to take you through the process in a systematic way. But I understand, Craig, that you do actually have a systematic process that you take for that. Do you want to briefly talk us through that, and then we'll chime in with what with variations and how that might work?
Yeah, and again, this is in the context, Guy, of I've got a new book, right? A game that I've had my eyeballs on. I get the book, and I want to understand what the hell this game is. Now, we're going to make the assumption that by buying the book, I have a general idea of what the genre is and what type of play we're talking about. Is it fantasy, sci-fi? So that is taken care of. But literally, the first thing I do is I go to the character sheet, because I feel like the character sheet informs us about a lot of what I should anticipate seeing when I open the book. It's going to give me a sense of, is it a skill-based system? Am I dealing with 8 core stats or 4 core stats? What is taking up real estate on the character sheet? Is this going to be a heavy gear game, right? So is there a huge equipment section? Is there a place where I'm marking, capacity or load? All of this stuff is just going to basically prep me for what I'm about to read and kind of put me in the right mindset. So I've had great success starting there. I then, continue on from there, but I'm curious for either of you, whether that's been a resource for you as far as understanding a game.
I think that the character sheet is sort of the starting thing, and I often joke that when you see even before that, when you see the book on the shelves of your sort of local gaming store, that's the first page you should look at, because that'll tell you more about the game than ever. I think probably start with that, and then it depends. I need to have some idea of what characters actually do in the game, and if I can't get that, I sort of hit a bit of a stumbling block, and I take a thing about am I going to run this or not, if you see what I mean. If I don't have a clear idea, I have to sometimes I put it on the back burner and try and do it. But sometimes I'll be like, I'm not sure sort of how it works. I'm thinking about recent games that I've picked up. I haven't had many, because I think games are a lot better nowadays at being clear about their intent. But that's the thing for me. Actually, what do they do? Can I sketch in my head a really basic, simple, someone's been taken by the bandits, fancy example, one shot? That's sort of where I go. What about you guys? What's your first step?
Yeah, similar to you guys. If you listen to What Would the Smart Party Do, my co-host Ben very much recommends that, even just for reading role-playing books generally. He goes to the back first and looks for an adventure or a character sheet or something like that to give him an idea. Probably the note of caution I'd add for this, which I don't want to be negative Nancy, but I think that might end up being my role on this cast, as you two both talk positively and I put caveats in. But just to be aware, sometimes character sheets are like an afterthought. They seem to be created by someone else who didn't actually design the game, so they they can lie to you sometimes. And also you might want to ignore things. So there might be like a big chunky section where you put all your equipment, but when you look at the game itself, encumbrance and stuff doesn't really feature into it, so you don't need to worry about that. But it definitely does give you that flavour. And similarly, my caveat for the adventures is like they can sometimes be a little bit weak sauce. Like my poster child for this is Spirit of the Century, which is like a fate-based game, which was universally lauded when it came out. But the criticism of the adventure that came with the book was that whoever wrote that hadn't read the advice in the rest of the book. So they produced a one-shot which didn't fit all the advice they told you to do in the book. But it definitely does give you that sort of like heads up. The other sort of thing I'd look at is the core system. I'd just really look at the basic rules to give you some sort of idea, and that gives you a really good sort of like gauge about, are we actually like look under every rock? Are we listening at doors? Are we resolving entire pub fights in one roll? That kind of thing, just to kind of get a bit of idea of what shape dice we're rolling. Do we care about if there's drowning rules, or is it turning over kingdoms, or that kind of thing? So it's, I think what we're all saying is like what you don't do is start on page 1 and try and read everything, and then determine what the game's about. It's like look for clues within the core system, the character sheet, the adventures that are there. And it doesn't necessarily have to be what's in the book. You can look online. Quite often these days people have got PDF adventures that come, or Kickstarter stretch goals that are put out, or RPG day one-shots or things like that. So there's a bunch of stuff out there. Or even other people's work. You can look at, like a lot of the kids do, is look on YouTube, and people will have run it. So again, this is, I think our approach, what we're saying is like you dip in first. Like you don't have to watch 8 episodes, 4 hours each of the new Daggerheart campaign or something to know if you like Daggerheart or what it's about, or to try and pitch a one-shot. You can probably just skip halfway through a video and watch 10 minutes, and that'll give you some sort of flavour. But there's all kinds of people out there and run things in different ways, so don't necessarily take what people do as what you'll have to do when you run the game.
So I've got all kinds of questions. I've got questions for both of you. My first one for you, Gaz, is are you like me that when I'm finding a game that's fighting me, that I will drop it faster than anything? So you talk about like a disconnect between the character sheet and the rule book, and the starter adventure looks like it was written by somebody who was not involved, or even consulted with the design people. I've encountered that, Gaz, and I will drop the book. There's just, and again, because we're so rich with games, I could come up with the most niche genre and go on Drive Through RPG and show you 10 games that allow me to play as sci-fi space dwarves that are mining our asteroids, right? Yeah. So if I come across one that has that kind of stuff, or even like not even having a starter adventure available for me, I'll be like, look, I've got 10 other choices. So I'm sorry. Like, and so I think to a certain degree for designers that are listening, you should think about that, because, you want to think about how do your customers and your players, GMs being the primary ones here, how are they going to consume what you're making? You can make a great game, but it's important for you to understand how it's being consumed.
Yes. Got to be accessible.
Yeah, it has to be, right? And Guy, I love your point, which is I need to understand what the characters are doing, but what you didn't tell us is how you do that. So how do you figure out what players are supposed to be doing in this game?
So I think the easiest way is if there's a starter adventure or some sort of quick start that you can look at and do that. Some games will tell you explicitly and are quite clear about it. So if we can give some positive examples of this. So I'd give you like the Yellow King role-playing game, something that I'm looking at maybe running on stream soon. It's a bit obscure, you start as American art students in Belle Epoque, Paris. It's a bit like what's happening. But what Robin Laws is very good at, in that there's a chapter where it says, right, this is what you're actually going to do. This is what your adventures will look like. This is the sort of antagonists you'll have. This is how the structure of play will look. And it says that explicitly. My biggest turn-off, like the opposite of that for me, is when you read and it tells you what happened in the world like 200 years ago, or starts telling you, even if it starts contemporary stuff, you have a big chapter of background that you're like, yeah, but I don't need to know what's happening here, or who the king of this province is, or who the chief of police. I need to know what my first level adventurers who've just met in a tavern and decided to go and find their fortune, like, what will they actually do? The easiest way, as you say, is a show don't tell, is a quick start. And I think it's really weird how variable those are these days. I would hold up as like the best that I've ever seen. Although Daggerheart is really good, we mentioned that before. The best that I've ever seen is Fabula Ultima. It's got a press start, quick start, where it teaches the game literally. You could play that quick start, and then you'll have the skills to run it or play it from that. You unlock bits of the character sheet as you go. So scene 1, you just use the first little bit, you just use your stats. Scene 2, you unlock the bonds, and it takes you through more and more complexity, which, okay, you sacrifice a little bit of this amazing sort of freedom of an adventure. It is like 5 scenes you go through in order, but you sacrifice that for the point of a really good teaching experience that takes you through the game step by step and leaves you sort of understanding it all and ready to prep it and do it. And the other thing that is sort of along with that is the pre-gens that it comes with have all got like 3 lines of background.
Right.
That just make you think, all right, this is what heroes are like. They've got, it's not like a huge history. It's not like, I think the RuneQuest ones have got like a side of A4, haven't they, about that
RuneQuest
history and lots of proper nouns that if you're really like, wait a minute, what are these 3 things?
Yeah.
You don't need that, but just like a little bit of, right, this is, you're a deposed princess from this other country. All right, it's cool, that's great. That's my starting point, really.
I think the pre-gen thing is a great call out because I take advantage of that because it gets into exactly what you're saying, which is who the hell are these people that we're going to be playing? And boy, the pre-gens give you a huge tip off on that. I'm going to give another call out and talk about a structure that I think works really well. Is I don't know if either of you are familiar with Outgunned by Two Little Mice. My recent obsession, it's Broken Compass version 2.0. Their starter adventure in the back, I think is phenomenal. Not only does it do what you're saying, Gaz, which is it takes us step by step and teaches us the mechanics in play as we're going, but there's fantastic sidebars with GM advice as you're going through it. And if you are going to run Outgunned, you can use that and not actually run it. And I think it does a real good job. And then they have a zine that backers got, but you can also buy it on their site that extends past that. So, hey, you finish this, little starter adventure. Now here's an entire mini campaign that you can continue on it, which I absolutely love. I'm wondering, Gaz, do you find any value in examples of play? Because I hear that discussed a lot, right? Which is 7 or 8 pages that takes us through a combat with Steve and Betty, and then Joe says this. Do you find those valuable?
I find them extremely irritating and devoid of value.
Don't hold back.
Why? What irritates you about it?
I'm definitely not being negative Nancy though this time. So, yeah. Part of the problem can be I find a lot of them are very similar, and they seem to follow the pattern that people think role-playing is. So if you're not playing in D&D like a game, for example, they will still, like Fate, for example, I can't remember exactly how it went, but the example of play sounded very much like some people playing D&D almost, and it was Jeff says to Nancy, what do you do this? And Nancy grins, and she says, well, I'm going to attack the soldier. And Jeff does this. And it's like this doesn't sound like a game of Fate. I mean, It might have been. And that might be how the people who wrote it up play their game. But that's not how I think the game flows, based on how I run it or how the rules say it goes. So quite often the examples of play aren't very inspiring. They'll involve climbing a wall or doing something else really mundane and boring and lacking in consequence. And they quite often have examples where it's not the edge cases, which is something that annoys me in rules, where it's like they don't say whether it's a round up or round down and the numbers involved are always even. It's like, why don't you put an odd number in there, and then we can see from the example that I think they could just be done better. And I think the main problem we have now these days is that you've got so much YouTube and people actually playing the game. Reading an example of a game being played seems very archaic and stuff like that. Not to say there's probably are some good examples of it, but I think you're better off actually playing the game yourself, having a little mock fight or rolling some dice to see what happens and that kind of thing, rather than reading how somebody else did it, because inevitably that will put a certain style of how a game master and players on you, or how you think you might do it, and they're very, very similar, even for widely different games when I read those examples. And I think it is just a consequence of, like, people always put equipment lists on character sheets when sometimes they're just not needed, or or irrelevant, but it's just a thing that I think from decades of baggage, people think this is what a role-playing game is. These are the things a character should have. This is how characters act. This is the sort of thing the GM says. And I'm very keen on breaking out of that and doing lots of different approaches and styles. So not very structured. I'd rather see something like a little solo game, which some things do, like you mentioned RuneQuest, that has like a solo adventure. Whether it's any good or not is something for a different podcast, which my friend Ben did an 8-part run. But that kind of approach would be better, where you actually engage with the rules and have some choices to make, and it's interesting and engaging.
Yeah, I was going to make the point that I think, like you said, I think the replays, they used to be called in JRPGs, where you write out the script. It's old tech now. There's a game that I've been looking at running recently, that fantastic game. I won't name it, spare the blushes, but it has quite a big replay in it, and it's the replay of an actual play video that is on YouTube. Like, it could just be a link, and so you could watch us play this. But it goes through the sort of thing of that.
And put the notes on while they watch it, just have annotations on so you can read it if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I'd almost say, don't, instead of doing your replay, game designers, do an AP video, stick it on YouTube. If you really want to, and you get the stretch goals for it, do a little director's commentary of it. That'd be really good, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
if you have the time and the effort to do that, where you talk through the things that you do. Because actual play is really good. I would add, and I don't know if you agree with me, Craig, that I do find using actual plays to prepare is really useful, but it's just a bit of a minefield finding actual plays that actually use the system and correctly and engage with it. And I know the three of us were sort of preaching to the converted in terms of how we do ours. Yeah. But I don't, apart from what we've got within us, Craig, have you found any good examples of that or bad examples of that? Do you go to an actual play when you're preparing?
Yeah. We'll leave the negativity to Gaz. I'll stay positive.
I've got some.
I mean, I very much rely on APs to talk about a lot of what we've talked about, which is not only not necessarily just the mechanics, but what does play look like, which seems real obvious, but it's not, and especially when we're talking something outside of GURPS or BRP, right? When we're talking about games today have very specific types of play they're built for. And it's important to understand that. Otherwise, you're fighting the system the whole time, right? If you're going into Blades in the Dark trying to run D&D, you're going to be fighting it the whole way because Blades in the Dark is not designed for that, right? So I definitely engage APs for that. I think I've said it before, and I think we've even discussed it, whether it be online or in a similar forum to this, which is, part of the reason I started doing APs was the lack of seeing actual plays that engage the system. Now don't get me wrong, I've come across APs that's all they do, and it's really hard to watch them. It's really hard to watch them flip through the book. It's really hard to watch them, go, give me a second, let me look this up. So there's a balance to be found there, but I think revealing that is good. In fact, one of the things that I've started to try to do is even pull back the curtain on decision making. So for example, like there'll be times in an AP where I'll go, you don't need to roll for that. I think, you have a high enough this skill to do it. And then I'll stop for a second and go, for those of you watching, the reason I'm doing that is because this, and this, right? They don't have an ogre chasing them. They have all the time in the world. So they're going to pick the lock. And I think that can be valuable. And it's stuff that I enjoy. A recent version of this and you're familiar with Jason Cordova's work. Jason does a phenomenal job in his APs of showing us all of the things we're talking about. What does the game feel like? What does play look like? And where do the mechanics fit in? And how do you engage with the mechanics? His recent GMing of The Between on Ain't Slayed Nobody, I think, is a masterclass for anybody who runs games or plays games, because Scott on that game is just crushing it, playing one of the characters. It's one of the best performances, and not like voice actor performances, like actual player performances I've seen on an AP. And Jason does a wonderful job of that balance. It's entertaining, it's enjoyable, but he also makes it very clear this is a game and we are playing a game. So that's probably one of my more recent best examples.
Yeah, I'd say there's lots of stuff on the Gauntlet, like Jason does that, but a lot of other games, Lowell Francis does a lot of stuff on the Gauntlet, and the Gauntlet's YouTube channel is part of it is deliberately to sort of show how games can be run. So they have, I think Lowell did a blog post about how That's why they don't use OBS or edit it or make it look nice. It's deliberately, you're going to see a game run that's realistically how that game should be run. And like you say, with that example of The Between, it's a really good example of PBTA GMing, but also how to play as a player in that game. The Between is a game where you have a lot of scope, and there's a wonderful moment right at the start where they get the first mission and the 4 characters go off in 4 completely different directions, some of which they've just made. One just goes off to find a fortune teller, doesn't she? Like, I'll just get a fortune teller, see if they know anything about this. It just demonstrates that sort of thing. And that's the thing, like, what do the players do? Like, what does play look like? What do players do? How do we structure this? How do we look at it?
So, yeah, I think premise acceptance is something I've been lost as well. We're quite big on as well. It's like, what's the premise of this game?
Yes.
It's what Craig's been discussing. It's like, I look through the book, like, what do we do? And I think, to go back to any really questions about do I put books down, is like, sometimes yes, but other times I kind of think, like, I want to show what this game can do.
Yes.
So that might be if I've seen actual players and it's run a certain way. Probably by people who just got baggage from running the same sort of game, Pathfinder, for years, and they've come to this new game and run that in a similar way. I try to, and it's like trying to go off-roading in a Ferrari. They're just using the wrong vehicle for the wrong sort of track. So that will encourage me to go in and do the thing that the game's good at. And I think I'm quite happy with we ran some Dragonbane recently, and that was a point where I will call out when I'm not using the rule. But why? So in a similar way. So there's a bit where you had to get across this river, or underground river or whatever, and hashtag minor spoilers, but there was something in the river. So when people failed, then that became a consequence. It was worth doing. Once it defeated that monster, it's like, I said, okay, we're not rolling anymore. You just get across the river, because that's, at that point, it would be boring. But like the feedback we got off is people like that. Apart from the character that all the players are introducing, obviously, as I knew they would, because we always have great players. It's the explain the rules and explain when not to use the rules, because nobody cares anymore. Certainly not the viewers at home. They don't want to see people rolling dice to get across a river endlessly. So, I think you can mix your approaches, and it is like Guy and I did a podcast ages ago about this, saying it's role plus play plus game, and I think that applies to your convention games, to stream games, whatever. It's like people want to know how to play the game sometimes. Sometimes the audience is, I want to be entertained. Sometimes it's a mixture of both. And, there's lots of people who will watch games and listen to them in different ways or engage with them. So having a mix of approaches, but including the role-playing and the gaming and having fun while you're there, I think it's important to try and capture all the elements you can.
Showing the fun of the game is a great call out too, guys, because I think that's important as well. Is showing the joys and the struggles. I think can be very valuable. So now I've got a twist. We're talking about us gronking a new game, right? We're 3 GMs. We've got a brand new book. We're digging through this book. We're trying to understand it. Okay, that's past. All right, we are freaking ninjas. We understand. There's other things I want to talk about to get to this point, but I think this gets to this. How do we teach the game, right? So now, and Guy, you're the poster child for this, because you do it like more than anybody I know. You sit down with 4 strangers at a convention. They've never played The Between before, and you don't want to spend the first hour and a half of this convention game going through the rules with them. I would love to hear how you play it. And I do this too, because most of the time when I start a new game on the stream, the people that come on to play have never played the game before. And I do that purposefully. Like, I don't send them the book. I'm like, and they're like, well, what do I need to, I don't want you to read. I want to teach the game as we play. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that approach.
So I'm exactly like you, Craig. I go into convention games with no expectation of the players knowing the rules. And in some cases, it can be better if they don't. You know what I mean? Sometimes I've run like D&D games. Back in the day when D&D first came out, I ran some D&D convention games that were hard because somebody arrived, oh, can I use my wizard that I've got here? I was like, oh, God, I suppose you can. Yeah, just a nightmare. I think I'll put the Between to one side, because the Between is like PBTA and stuff is a little bit tricky.
Pretty unique,
You're almost trying to get players to play. The system doesn't matter, really. The system just runs itself. It's getting players to play in the correct way. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
To adapt to
the strengths of the system.
Exactly, yeah. With a more trad game, so for instance, I run quite a lot of 13th Age, quite a lot of 13th Age Glorantha. It's quite complex, quite tactical. I tend to put it in the sort of scenario notes. We'll do pre-gens, we'll hand them out. I give players a really quick whistle-stop tour of the character sheet.
Mm-hmm.
Not in any detail, but it preempts in the middle of the game somebody going, oh, wait a minute, what does my dagger do? Quick whistle-stop tour of the character sheet, and then I'll go around like each player and tell them any extra stuff that applies to them. 13th Age is quite good at being explicit in, if you don't want to, if you just want to roll dice and have fun, play a barbarian or a ranger. If you want a more tactical and want to really engage with the rules, play a fighter or a wizard or a sorcerer. So you call that out a bit explicitly as well. Then in the structure of the one shot, I will always start with some sort of action scene that's usually quite easy, and it might be a combat. It might just be a thing where we all need to make a skill check to get out of the burning castle or whatever. And I make that quite easy, particularly if it's a combat, because whatever level of system mastery the game has, people are coming in brand new to this. So you can't expect them to fight tactically or to understand what the strengths of their characters are in that first combat. So they fight like 2d3 goblins. It only takes a couple of rounds, but they've got the system. And that combat, bit of advice to budding convention GMs here, that combat will feel really slow. You'll be working towards pace. You'll be doing it. You'll do that combat. You'll be like an hour in. You'll be like, oh God, I've got 3 more of these to get through. None of them will take that long, but by the end of that little training fight, like you'd get in a video game level where you learn how to shoot and how to crouch and stuff, everything will be a lot smoother. You'll still get the odd player that will slow things down maybe and isn't quite got it, but the vast majority of the players will just be on it and do it. And if you can get to that first sort of 45 minutes, by the end of that, everyone knows how to make a skill roll, how to fight in their character, and any additional resources that they have, like fate points or bennies, some idea that they can spend those or how they can do those. I mean, they're always a bit of a nightmare because people just forget about them. So always remind about that, because people just don't, or obviously have them as counters, hand them out so people have them. But that it comes into adventure structure as well, and that's something actually we're talking about quick starts. I find some companies will bring out their convention, they'll publish their convention adventures which they've used to teach the system, and again, really,
that's amazing.
Really variable. Some of these in terms of their structure, some of them will start with hours and hours of convoluted backstory and plot. Like, what? You just wouldn't do it. You sit down, you've got 4 hours with people. Why would you do it? So read those critically, but they're a really good resource to look at as well. And obviously, I've got to, there's loads of one-shots on my blog you can look at for different systems. They're hopefully not as rubbish as the ones I've just been talking about. But that's my sort of approach. You structure the first bit of the adventure to help teaching and teaching practice. What's your approach, guys? You run Savage Worlds a lot, which is, we probably think is fairly straightforward. To the new player to Savage Worlds, there's a lot of moving parts.
It's a very different game, especially if they're coming from a trad background. Savage Worlds is very different. Go ahead, guys.
Yeah, I mean, I have this argument sometimes with people, and they say it's not fast, furious fun, which is like their tagline, and it definitely is. And if it's not FFF for you, that's not the game's fault, is what I'll say to people. And I don't mean that in a harsh way, but maybe the way you played or the actual players you've seen are not approaching it in the best way for that system. So I'll do a pretty similar thing in that I will start off with some sort of action and talking the premise of the game and what you do and what's it good at. Savage Worlds has little subsystems, so it might at some point have a mass combat, but I'll leave that for later because it's still fairly simple, but it's relatively evolved. There's like a skill challenge type thing and a social encounter type thing. And because these rules are in the book, it's like, well, okay, that's what this game wants me to do, so I'll put a bunch of those in the scenario. One thing I do for Savage Worlds is make seasoned characters the cults. They've got 4 or 5 advances above a novice, and that's, I think, a common mistake for people running one shots. So for new people, is you think I have to use the most basic thing, and actually they're not that interesting. First level at D&D, pretty boring. D&D really starts at the 3rd level. So it's the same with Savage Worlds. It's the same for a lot of games. Don't feel like you have to start with a bog standard whatever, because quite often those characters are designed that way so that you play over weeks and build into something. Make the characters you give your players more capable to start off with without overdoing it. You don't want to be running 12th level D&D as your first game, but just give the characters more, and as well that helps you establish a niche. So who is the barbarian, what are they good at, who's the ace fighter pilot, what are they good at, and you can really lean into some of the edges or advantages or whatever it is you've got in a system to add those things in. And I do a similar thing to you, Guy, that I'll give a 5-minute introduction of the rules, because you don't want to start with your in media res, this action sequence is happening, and then people say, what do I roll? Because someone will anyway, but you don't want everybody doing that. So the first thing to do is saying, when I ask you to roll something, these are your attributes, these are your skills, they're in alphabetical order. You roll this dice, and you roll a wild die. You've got bennies, you can make re-rolls if you want to. And you'll have to say that multiple times throughout the game, but don't bother hammering every single rule until people have got it. There's a big list of things in combats you can do. I just tell people, if you want to do a cold shot, or you want to go wild, or you want to do whatever, there's a rule for it. I know it. You don't need to worry about it. Let's just get going. And then you teach through play and start introducing stuff. And at certain points, as you mentioned, guys, you start bringing in the options that you've already told them they've got.
Yeah.
But people will forget because they're new to this. They're excited about the story and the character and what everybody else is saying. So then, after you've had your first easy fight or whatever it is, the second time round, when someone goes, "Oh, I rolled, a 1 and a 2. I can't believe I missed." It's like, do you want to bend that? And spend your equivalent to a fate chip to get a reroll. To the extent it's now even become a joke in my games that when I say, "Do you want to benny that?" people think I'm trying to steal their resources away from them. And other players will go, "No, don't do it, don't do it." And I'm like, "Oh, it's like taking candy from a baby, this." But what that does, that method, is it makes it quicker and it stops, because something else, people might look at the character sheet and go, "I've got 3 of these bennies, do I spend them? Is this role important enough?" And have a bit of analysis paralysis and not know the game, so they don't know how many they can spend or whether they should or not. So if you can make it a bit of a conversation, that encourages people, if they should be spending them, you can say, like, "Do you want to spend one all the time?" If it's something they should be holding on to, you can kind of go, "Are you sure you want to spend a penny on that, that notice roll that you're making? It's just a perception check. Like, you might need these in a minute."
when you're about to die.
I was just going to sum it up by saying, like, you can introduce rules slowly and make them more of a conversation. You don't have to keep it a dry, "This is what this rule does in this situation." Just as and when it comes up, or if you think something would help someone, or after they've had the first fight, the second fight, you go, "You might want to check the back of your sheet because I've listed these things for you." And they will then understand when they read the back of the sheet what they mean. Whereas in the first fight, it'd be too much information. But now they've played a game for a little bit, they can look at the back and go, "Oh, wait, this would be really useful." It's like, yes, it would. That's why it's on your sheets. There we go. Let's roll them, I was
going to say, Gaz, I think that's the best advice we've given so far today, because I think being very aware of the cognitive load of your players is critical, and explaining rules outside of context versus in context, which is what you just got done talking about, is a world of difference. And don't feel obligated, especially when you're early on, of giving them every option. I know that's the mantra of our hobby, but you're not doing anybody any favors. And don't be afraid to help them. Right, like you said, they failed a notice roll, and do I want to spend luck, or do I want to use a Benny and go, "This is probably not the right time to do it. You probably want to save that." That's okay, right? You're not going to do that for the rest of the campaign, telling them what to do or not to do with the characters. But early on, help them out. And I love, Gaz, we have, and I do it too, which is like, we haven't talked about this yet. So this is a good time for me to explain to you how the chase rules work, right? Or how this works, or you have an option of, in 7th edition Call of Cthulhu, you can spend luck, and this might be an opportunity to do that. If I load all that onto them in the first encounter against the goblins, none of it's going to be kept. I'm going to have to repeat it 10 or 15 times, but you do it in context. I think that's phenomenal advice.
Really good. I was going to come in that I really like that you suggested spending a Benny when you'd roll a 1 and a 2. Because of course you can't spend them if you get double 1 in Savage Worlds, which leads me to think there's a bit of a step in between, because talking about Savage Worlds, talking about 13th Age, talking about presenting at the table, to do that as GMs we need to know the system inside out. So I think there's a step. I think we should take a step backwards and say so between the. We've got the adventure, we've maybe made some pre-gens or thought about it or got some pre-gens, and we're running it at a convention in 2 weeks. In order to teach that game, we need to know it and have internalized it ourselves. And we don't have, usually, although it's a good hack to do if you can, we don't have a friendly GM who can tell us how to play it. So maybe, Craig, what do you do in that intermediate step to teach yourself the game?
So I will establish what the conflict systems or the resolution systems are in the game. The primary ones tend to be combat, so we'll start there. I will have some characters, and I will do a combat. I will go through putting myself in, and it's the same way I teach myself board games too, where I put myself in the seat of each player as I go. And that's where you find those niche weird things. Like Gaz, you made the joke about rounding up or rounding down. You may not think about that when you're reading the book, right? Or you might even read it in the book and it just goes right past you. But when you're in play and you're like, oh, I'm supposed to, take half damage. Well, do I do half up or half down? Now now I'm going to see those little niche things that tend to pop up, and I can investigate them. So I'll do that first to work through it. And then the next thing I do is a luxury that not a lot of people have, is within my community. I will do what I call offline play. So I'll reach out to my patrons and say, hey, can I steal like 90 minutes from 4 or 5 of you? I just want to run a combat in this game. And do you mind sitting through it with me? And I'll do that, or I'll do a one shot with them, like 2 or 3 scenes with them, with no expectation that we're going to keep on playing, no expectation that these characters mean anything. It's literally help me just like run this game, and then get feedback from them afterwards. So where was the friction? Where did you feel like it, what did you really like about it? So I can make sure I emphasize it. All of that stuff is critical, but I firmly believe, and I think we're aligned here, the first time you run the game should not be the first game you run.
Yeah, if at all possible, I think that's the case. I think there are. Yeah, the ideal is getting a group together for a practice run, and like we've done that, particularly on Unconventional GMs. We've done that. There's games we've wanted to do it. I think, guys, it's fair to say we did it with Dragonbait, not because it's a particularly tricky system, but it's weirdly out of our comfort zone as a playing group. Is that fair, do you think? And it's quite an old school trad game, and it's not what we normally play. So it's also getting the players used to sort of how to do it, and then record the second session, if you see what I mean, almost with that. Do you ever do? So I like the idea of the sitting in people's, actually doing a solo conflict yourself and rolling the dice. And I agree. When I've taken the time to do that, often you find like loads of rules holes and things where you're like, wait a minute,
I thought I knew this.
Where is it? Where exactly? What was that? I can't do that. I'm trying to think of the last time I did that, because I obviously you get your systems and you internalize them and you go through, and that level of prep is unusual. But I'm at the point of needing to do that. We're gonna record His Majesty the Worm, fantastic new dungeon crawling game on the channel. I'm going to run I've got convention in a week's time. I'm going to run a face-to-face game. I need it to be a face-to-face game, so it uses tarot cards for resolution. So I want to actually have the cards before I have to faff around with playingcard.io or whatever online to do it. And that's even before I do that, I need to go through a combat and just see what it looks like and how it plays from that. Is that something you do, Gaz? Do you do that, sit yourself around the table and run out a sample combat? Have you ever rolled dice in that lonely fun kind of way? Or is there another approach?
That's definitely a Ben thing. He loves doing that. That's one thing. After he's looked at the back of the book and read it backwards, and all the other things that he does, is he'll have a fight, as he calls it. So he'll get either 2 characters or whatever, a monster and a character, and make them fight each other, just to see what shakes out. I think it's different. Like Dragonbait, you mentioned one in particular, where I thought when you read it, it makes sense. But I could tell, because of the number of actual little tweaks and different talents and rules there are, that when you start to play it and you ask questions, that's when the thing shakes out, that you're like, do I actually understand this game or not? So yeah, that was definitely what we needed to. I think others, I've weirdly regressed on some, like Sundered Isles. I'd never run it before and just run it at a convention. It worked great, because that sort of game, or Blades in the Dark, or Agon, or the Paragon games, those sort of things, are very procedural. They say like, run this game this way. So you've got a bit more flexibility just going for it and going, I'm just going to do what the book says and follow the instructions, and then that will probably work out. But we played some Star Force quite recently, and I've forgotten all the rules. So that there is an element of, you have to keep doing it, especially like us. We play a lot of different systems. You're trying to get through a lot of different things for fun as well as for channels or for conventions or whatever. So if you're constantly chopping and changing, you need to keep match fit on stuff. It's like boxing or other things. If you don't keep boxing, your speed goes and your accuracy and all the rest of it. So you have to keep doing it to get there. So there is an element of practicing things to keep up to where you should be, especially if you're going to be teaching other people how to do it, or showing people how to do it. But yeah, I'm reasonably good at analysing rules and working out if I think they will work or not. We played some Shadow of the Demon Lord a while back, and the GM decided that he was going to have this chase mechanic that he added himself. I was like, okay, fine. And then he presented it on the screen, and I just went, that's not going to work. And he was a little bit put out, and Ben was like, oh no, come on, let's give it a go. I'm like, okay then. Within 2 rounds, we abandoned it because it wasn't going to work. And I've got one of those sort of maths brains and stuff where I can see if the numbers don't add up, I can tell. Yeah. Or, like this game, Best Left Buried, I quite enjoyed a one shot of that, but I could see there were certain like two-handed weapons don't make sense, or whatever it was, or like you can just see from the numbers sometimes what things are or aren't going to work. But as we always say, like before you review a game, try and play it, because there were things that may not seem great on paper, but when you play them, suddenly make sense. So it's definitely worth doing that, giving it a go, as written, just to see what happens.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll be pleasantly surprised and things will come out you hadn't expected. And other times you'll be like, aren't I clever? Because you could see the problem coming down the track and it's proved to still be a problem, so you can do something about it, you know. We have run games before, both Guy and I know, where in game we go, the rules say this, but we're not going to do that. And I think that's fine. I think there is a bit of a... anywhere in ttrpg, Twitter, or any kind of like discourse or group, you will get people telling you should run rules as written, or you should just do whatever you want, or all kinds of things. And I think that the key to these, try to run rules as written, and if you're not doing it, explain why you're not. And you can do what you want, of course. So it's a mixture of both, not an extreme, but a mixture of both, is that you don't have to religiously slave away to what a book says, but equally, if you divert it from it, it's worth letting people know what you're doing, and preferably why, because that'll help them make their own decisions about whether they want to do that or not.
And it doesn't have to be rules. I was thinking of equipment is something. I have zero interest in equipment in games, particularly in one-shots. Like I just don't like. I think the game that does it best for me is like Vaesen, where you get the equipment that you start and then you can't even buy it anymore because you lose it at the end of each mission, don't you? You've got to like build a weapons
to borrow some.
Yeah. I just have no interest in that at all. But it's a big thing in like trad games. You'll have this big equipment list, and so I will almost always be like, right, you've got your weapons, you've got your army, you've got whatever reasonable stuff you want to be. If we're not sure if you've got a 10-foot pole or whatever, we can always just make a wisdom check or something, see if you remember to bring it or not, and just cut that out, because that's an example of something that's complex that usually adds nothing. Particularly to a one-shot game, there's very, very little.
It just adds time, doesn't it? It sucks up time out of your session.
Completely. And where do we stand on sort of GM screens or having a summary of the rules? Craig, do you use those? Obviously, we're in an internet age now, so an actual GM screen is a bit weird.
It depends on the game. Yeah, it depends on the game. Even when I have a GM screen, for me, it's not a matter of blocking things with it. It's a matter of display for myself, right? So I'll use the inside of the screen, but I'm not doing it to hide something behind it. And, you know, more often than not, and again, it's system dependent, but more often than not, I will not have a GM screen. And I might have my notes and adventure in front of me. If I can't trust my players not to be reading and cheating, then why am I playing with them at all? So, so what are we doing here right now? And I'm not going to have those people at my table anyway. And just one quick thing on the rules, because this is a bit of a bugaboo for me. I definitely get, especially not using a rule. That is something that I will do sometimes by mistake. But the one thing that I get a little annoyed with, though, is when people will say, I'm going to run this, but I'm going to change this, this, and this. And I go, well, okay. Have you struggled with that? Well, I haven't ran it yet. And I get a little annoyed there, because you have to have at least a certain degree of faith in the designer. That the designer has spent a lot more time with this game than you have, who's read it once. And there might be a reason that's not very evident until you play on why a certain rule is a certain way. And where I see this the most is with Blades in the Dark. Like, I hear all the time people like, I just read Blades in the Dark, I'm going to run it, but I'm going to do this and this is different. And like you guys, I can see the Matrix. I'm like, you're just going to blow the whole goddamn thing up then. Then just stop and just play whatever you think you're going to play, but don't call it Blades anymore, because there's games like Blades that are so tightly designed that if you pull out a gear and try to put another one in there, it's going to break things 2 layers different from where you are. So that's the one thing I'll just, for those of you that are listening, just be a little cautious of that. It's safer to pull something out or not utilize it the first time it could be utilized and utilize it later. But be real careful about bringing in a custom chase mechanic into your, Shadow of the Demon Lord game. There might be a reason why that wasn't used. Right. And you may not realize it. You don't want to realize it when you're at the table with everybody playing.
Yeah, I think it's like Blades of the Dark has an implied way of playing as well. And we always talk about like John Harper. How do you prep a John Harper game?
Exactly.
To do. And and to be fair, it's the same with anything Jason Cordova's done, anything Sean Tompkins done. Just follow those steps.
Similar.
Like, do it. Don't you can trust him. It's not going to be different. If you want to ag on, get an island, do what it says in the book. You don't need to overthink it. And that it used to be more common, but I still think you find. My example always used to be Dungeon World, where you play a Dungeon World convention game, and somebody would get out this like detailed dungeon map and a keyed location, and you're like, you sat there thinking, oh, that's really not how this game's meant to work. And when I make I can't remember the name of the spout law, is it, where you make that move? Like when I get hit on that, like, you're not meant to tell me stuff. I'm meant to make it up.
Exactly.
Like there's a big disconnect that I think you'd hope we're over in the sort of trad indie sphere, because it's not for everyone. But if it's not for you,
play a different game.
Play games that support that playstyle. Play a more trad game. If it is for you, then go with that. But don't try and shoehorn something in where it doesn't fit. I think is the thing for me. So yeah, I for my GM screen usage, what I've become a fan of doing is getting the GM screen in PDF of all things, and just snipping stuff out onto a one sheet. So like around Spire a few weeks ago on the channel, the GM screen's brilliant. It's not got really rules in it, but it's got like D20 random drow names, it's got D20 things, it's got loads of random tables. Really cool to have just there in case you bump into someone at a party and want to know who they are. So yeah, just snipping out the stuff that you would use tends to be what I would use more. Gaz, I don't think I've ever seen you with a screen in front of you.
They're for amateurs. I just, if I ever do have a GM screen, I lay it flat.
Yeah.
GM screens, my opinion on them is similar to character sheets. That quite often you get a GM screen, it's got like a list of whatever, 10-foot poles and stuff, and it's like, I don't need this immediately at the table. What I wanted to know was the chase rules, which you've not told me about on the chat. It's that kind of thing. So yeah, I do similar to you, Guy, that I will snip out things I think are important or are going to come up in this particular session that I will want to know about. So if I know I'm having a mass combat later, I'll have a one sheet with all the mass combat rules on, or whatever I need to be, So just have the stuff you need at hand. And if I have a G screen, it's like flat, like I said, but more often it's my notes. And I think that's, I don't know whether everybody will find it useful, but it's how I learn things, is I write things down quite often. I did a master's a couple of years ago and stuff, and when I was writing stuff down, that one of the lecturers would say stuff like, don't worry, I'm going to send you all the slides. It's like, well, I won't learn it if I don't write it down. If I just sit here and you talk at me, and then I get a bunch of slides later that I haven't got sufficient notes on, we've wasted an hour here. So do yourself a favour while you're reading through and making your own notes. Apart from being able to use them as your own pseudo GM screen at the table, you will learn the game more, I think. Everybody learns differently. Maybe it won't work for you, but I suggest trying it because it works for me. That's how you put things in your own words, or you just put down what's important, and you don't have to have a table that goes up to level 20 if you're playing a level 3 D&D game. Just have the stuff that applies to level 3 and low. That sort of thing. So it'll help you learn. It'll give you more of exactly what you need at the table when you need it. And you can just put stuff on there that's for that adventure. If you're not having a mass battle, don't worry about it. But if you're going to have a social conflict, have your social conflict bit on there. And stuff like you say, guys. Well, that's one of my things that I do for Pendragon all the time, is I love a piece of paper with a bunch of names on, because they can be a bit weird for Cymric names, or Saxon. We're in Saxon lands now. It's a whole different set of vowels and consonants that go together. But if you just have a list of 10, you can start ticking them off. Because, this is the sort of thing that happens all the time, despite how you prep your adventure, despite what you try and push players towards, despite the obvious clues. They will say, well, who's the blacksmith or something? Or you mentioned that somebody's wearing a red hat, and they'll decide that that's the most important thing in the world ever, despite the fact it's not. So you need to be able to, on your feet, provide some sort of what they're called, something about them, maybe a list of motivations that you can roll on or have a look on, that sort of thing. Because I think one of the important things for me in running games, and this works particularly for conventions and stuff like that, is they're very similar to I always call it the Wizard of Oz. There's a guy behind the curtain who's pulling all the levers, and we all know he's there. You can see his feet under the curtain, and because we're all GM as well, so we know what other GMs are doing. We can see it happening. But you work towards ignoring it. So we all play like there isn't a guy behind the curtain, and that big illusion of the Wizard of Oz is the thing that's the thing, and that's what we're going to concentrate on. We know what's actually happening. And it's not a duck serenely on a pond. The little legs are paddling like crazy underneath. But let's all play in a way that we pretend, we're all buying into the illusion and stuff like that. So I think that's a good approach for everybody. And try and get that sort of thing I mentioned before, where the rules are keeping some of them opaque from the players. It's a similar sort of thing. Like, you don't need to see all the ins and outs of this. Just enjoy the car ride. You don't need to know how the V8 engine works straight away. I can show you later when we have a coffee break if you want, but like right now, let's all just try and play a good game.
I think the idea of player aids is a really good one. When I play in person here at the house, or even when I'm playing online, I'll create journals of player aids and say, hey, here's a good like short short kind of recap on how this works, and here's a good reference for you for about how that works. It gives them something to look at and stuff during downtime. More often than not, I will have the greatest gift ever, which is, I'm doing something and a player will go, actually, Craig, I think it's this way, because they have it right in front of them. Like, oh, you're right, that is that. Like, God, what a great gift that is as well. Mm-hmm. There's another tool that I use, and I'm curious if you gentlemen use it at all. Do any of you guys use O'Leary's cats when you're getting ready for a game?
Yeah, I've used it. You mean the concept, the sort of introduction thing from that? Yeah, I've often used it. I mean, do you want to explain what it is first before we say whether we've used it?
Yeah, Patrick O'Leary, and I don't remember. It seems like actually, it looks like 2015. I'm looking at it now. Came up with this idea of CATS, which is concept, aim, tone, and subject matter. Right, CATS. And it's a way to kind of pitch a game to a table. But I think it's also a way, it does a lot of other things for me. One, it forces me to make some decisions about the game. So when I'm preparing the CATS and saying, here's what the concept is, here's the aim of the game, what we're trying to do, here's the tone, and here's the subject matter that we're going to talk about, it forces me to really like make some commitments and go into it very clear and outline it. So I love it. So the preparing the CATS for me is just as valuable as being able to hand it out. But for the players, it can be extremely valuable to see that and say, okay, this is what we're doing, right? It's a lot of what we've just talked about and encapsulates it real easy. If you just search for CATS RPG tool on Google, it'll come up immediately. It's a GitHub, and it's half a page. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of it. Again, it helps me prepare and forces me to make decisions, and it's extremely valuable when you're looking for your players. And I've had a couple times where people are like, Craig, do you want to play, on my channel? And I'll say, can I get the CATS for it though? And they're like, oh, what is that? And, and I have forced it sometimes because I think it can be significant.
Yeah. I think it's really important at convention games. I think that's the sort of the main thing it's useful for. I don't think I've used it on the channel, but it's a bit of we're a closed circle of players at the moment, really. So that sort of discussion goes on in the WhatsApp chat before as we're setting it up. I find it really useful at convention games because you cannot rely on your players at convention games having read any of your game description at all. We've got a friend, Neil Gow, designer of Duty and Honor, hopefully second edition's coming out soon, who tells this story of the first times he ran Monster Hearts. So teenage monsters, it's proper, certificate 18, PBTA, there are sex moves, it's all, explicitly queer-coded game, lots of stuff going on. It starts his introduction of the game with these sign-ups and says, well, has any of you starts going through these cultural references, like, have you seen Buffy? Have you seen, any sort of teenage monster like Twilight? No. Well, do you know, like, PBTA, have you heard of the game? No, we normally just play D&D and Warhammer. It's like, well, why did you sign up? So the art looked really nice. It's a difficult situation then, because you're in a situation where there's a bit of PvP in the game explicitly. There's safety tools are on the table and need to be used, and having that CATS at the start really makes you fit with that. I've started running Trophy Dark quite a bit at conventions. Great one-shot system, but one of the core things in it is that you are doomed.
Yes,
like you're playing to lose.
Yep.
Your characters are not going to return from the forest or the dungeon in any. Well, they're probably not going to return at all. If they do return, that's like a worse outcome, if you see what I mean, because they'll be so changed by the experience. And something like CATS just forces you to really, really explicitly explain that. And, when people are looking around saying, but what about, no, literally, you are going to lose. The joy of the game is doing that, and it helps to be really clear about it. And the S bit, the subject matter, also means you're explicit about safety tools. And I think I'm like you, Craig. I'm sort of, if you're running a game at a convention, you should be using safety tools. If I'm sat in a game at a convention and there aren't safety tools, I'll ask. I'll put them on. I'll do the X card and say, well, can we have it? And if the GM's not happy with that, I've not had to do this before, but I think I'm at the point where if a GM was really against them, I'd probably walk.
Yeah, just not my game.
Not, we need to make it a standard thing, really, so people do it. But yeah, that sort of introduction is really, really important. Gaz, what are the key things you find when, I'm trying to think, I mean, Savage Worlds is a good example. Do you get people sort of turtling and not taking risks in Savage Worlds? What sort of introduction do you go for some of the games that you run?
Yeah, I probably don't think it's formally as cats, but I express that premise that we talked about. I will make that very clear about what people are doing. So I run quite a lot of Pendragon, for example, and I will say, you are knights. You will look on the left-hand side, you've got these virtues. All these things on the left-hand side, they're good things, they're things you should be doing. All the things on the right-hand side of that are bad, you probably don't want to do those things. And I've explicitly got each character that I use for convention that has one or two things on the bad side. But I say to them, this is not something that other people will find pleasing or be pleased about, but you're slightly flawed characters. So it's to get people into that, like, you might play into this, but like try and head off that, but it's what my character would do the moment you get out of some players where they go, like, oh, it says I'm cruel, so I have to be cruel all the time, constantly. It's like, no, you don't have to do that. But yeah, with Savage Worlds again, I'll say, like, you're the good guys. You're going to this village because they need 7 heroes because these bandidos are coming and taking all their stuff, and you're going to train them and help them fight off the bandidos. And that's just like, that's what you're going to do. And if somebody starts going, oh, well, I'm the loner, and I'm going to get, it's like, no, you're not. You're not. You're either taking part in this, or you might as well go to the bar, because I'm not coming back to you. Like, you've gone after the silver mines on your own. Good. Enjoy your game on your own. Thanks very much. Like, happily, most people will buy in. And sometimes it just takes a little bit of reminding or gentle encouragement, because there are players that are just used to playing the same sort of game with the same people for year after year after year, and will just fall back into, this is what role-playing is, and do the same thing as they've always done. And you might have to say to them, that's all cool, would you not like to do this instead? Or do you see what Guy did over here, as an example? You're saying you want to search the drawers for a document. Guy's just like brought down the government. So the scale of what you're asking for, you can ask for more, be bold or whatever, or sometimes you have to go ask for a little bit less, because you've just told me you want to do 4 things, and I've got a bunch of other players who all want to go tonight. So what's the first thing you want to do? What's the most important to you? So it's not just a setup at the start, I think, is the point I'm making. You can very quickly go, this is what we're doing, and if you're not happy with that, that's okay. You don't have to play this game, but this is the game we're playing. And then throughout the game, you can kind of nudge people left and right and whatever, or bring them up or push them down a little bit to kind of keep everything along in the same sort of way, make sure you're gently herding people in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think you can have a certain level of kindness to remind yourself of during that as well, because I completely agree, Gaz. But one thing that I forget is that there are fewer people like us and more people that have just played one game. That is, and it's easy for us to forget. And even in the community that I play with, they're all used to, like, oh, Craig's got another game. Now we're going to learn a new system, right? They're very familiar with kind of this thing. But that's not common. And I think that when I've had opportunities where I've encountered people that have only ever played, let's say, D&D before. It's okay to be, give them, I understand that's not really what happens here. Let me kind of explain it to it. Sometimes it's completely innocent, right? And, and to your point, Gaz, you gotta help them a little bit, and teach them what a beautiful world this is with more than one game.
You don't have to, you be kind, but you don't have to treat them with kid gloves. And
I agree.
The important thing is to make clear that you're doing it because it's the game and not you. Because sometimes I get players like the Kraken that we're going to in a week or so. I went to the spring one, and we had a bit in there where one of the characters has Grim Servant of Death, the Savage Worlds hindrance, which means if you roll snake eyes on your dice, you shoot one of your friends. So it's completely not your fault, and I picked the character, so that it's not the player's fault that that's on the character sheet. But they rolled a double one, and another player was being quite aggressive towards them. It's the first time the first player had been at this convention and whatever else. It's like, you don't sound like this is you role playing. This sounds like you're being an arse on purpose.
Yeah.
And you might not be, but sitting here as an independent arbiter, that's what it sounds like to me. And I'm trying to be generous. So like, I had to sort of step in and say, well, can we not do that? And so it's a similar thing that when I think Guy, was it you running it? I'm not sure. It was one of the games like Houses of the Bloodies. It might have been Cannons actually, but it's one where you roll some dice and you have to pick a number of dice that you're going to get a target before, and if you succeed, how many you've kept behind, or I can't remember what they're called, bargains or something, but they're like the things you can use to do yes and yes but, and you kind of have a conversation about what happened. And the more of them you've got means that you're more likely to have the last word in that conversation. Like, I stab you, but it's only a flesh wound, but the blade was poison. And it's one of those kind of build-up games. And we had a couple of guys in there who were from a D&D RuneQuest type background, and they were They were clearly lost at first, but I think the wrong thing to do would be go easy on them,
right,
and not do that. And I lent into it, making clear to them, like, sorry about this, but I've got these 2 dice left, so this is going to hurt.
Yeah.
And then added in my extra bits and like really dug the knife and twisted it around a little bit. And quite quick, they're like, oh, right, I said, I want to get my own back now. It's like, yes, that's exactly the correct attitude for this game. You should be trying to get your own back and screwing my character over. And so, yeah, play hard, but make sure that people know that you're doing that because that's the game, and they don't feel persecuted or that you're being weird about something.
And that's the full circle, isn't it, Gaz? Because you just said, that's something we made clear at the very beginning, right? So something like that snake eyes mechanic, that might be something as a GM I'll point out as saying, hey, by the way, Guy has this thing, right? That if he rolls 2 1s, he's going to shoot one of you. It's part of the character. It's going to be weird when it happens. It may not be something you're familiar with, but trust me, I put it there because it's pretty fun and creates a neat moment. So if it comes up, and that's the setting the expectations, which I think you did a great job explaining.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, similar to that, I think it's that thing about setting expectations and knowing what crowd you're serving.
Yes.
Like, look at what other games are on at that convention. Look at who else is in this meetup. A lot of the time it will be D&D players, but for instance, I run a lot of 13th Age Glorantha. An awful lot of the players that I get for that are used to playing RuneQuest. And in RuneQuest, there's a big thing that like combat is usually not the best option. I mean, it's not, because the combat systems like involves multiple looking up tables and working out whether it comes off hit points or armor points. Anyway, but it's also really lethal. You'll lose limbs. And so I tend to be really, really explicit, 13th Age Glorantha at the start. So look, you are big damn heroes. There's going to be like 3 fights in this game. Like, there's not trying to avoid it and negotiate with the brew or sneak in isn't going to happen. Like, you're going to be, this is a fighting game as well. It's nearer to D&D than that, and be really explicit about that. The flip side of that is, I guess, if I was running Dragonbane or a more sort of OSR type game, which I don't run many of, but I've run some like Electric Bastion Land and stuff, I've often been like explicitly, right, look in your character sheet, you see how many hit points you've got. You've got 3, right, a sword does a d6 damage, and we're going to let the dice land where they fall. So let's just be clear that we are going to be playing hard. We're not going to do that. I've got a stack of other pre-gens here for you, but that's how we're going to play. I've just had an experience where I'm going back to quite a complex game that I used to run a lot. I used to GM Mouse Guard loads, and I'm just getting ready to GM it at Kraken in a week's time. Like, how much I used to run it is I opened up the box and I've got like 6 one-shots that I'd printed out in there from when I used to do it. But that's got a really weird sort of conflict mechanic where you pick 3 actions in order, and the GM picks 3 actions and how they interact. So attack versus defense is simple, but if someone chooses feint, it overcomes one of attack or defense. I don't know. I've got it on a crib sheet for when I run it.
Like rock, paper, scissors, but with more items on the list.
And I do, for that, I explicitly do, like, first conflict, I'll do, right, okay, so you need, as a players, to choose what your 3 things are. I'm going to be doing the same. So is everyone clear on what they're doing? Right. And I'll walk away then.
Ooh.
And like literally be really explicit.
Nice.
That I'm doing this. I'm playing to win.
Yeah.
You call me back when you're ready, but this is you versus me. And obviously I'm not, the first conflict, the numbers are nicer, so it's not going to be quite as tough on them. But it sets that thing up. This is quite important. This is a high stakes thing. I'm not going to guide you through what your tactics are. You've got to try and beat me. And it's rock, paper, scissors. There aren't a huge number of tactics to it. But how it interacts, making that genuinely random so I don't know what they've got till they flip over the card.
That's cool.
Just help that to be explicit with it. And I'm conscious that we're getting maybe near to time. I wonder, though, if there's a sort of rounding off now of what we've talked about after we've run that game for the first time. And despite the name of my blog, I'm always a big thing of like, if I've done the prep to run a game once, I should run it again, and I should run it again, and I should iterate and do it. Is there any sort of techniques, if I go to you, Craig, first, are there any techniques you use after you've run to sort of reflect any like tweaks you might have made?
Yeah, speaking of the Gauntlet, so this turns out to be a Gauntlet fan podcast now. I'm a huge fan of Stars and Wishes, which is what I learned that from the Gauntlet and watching theirs. And I just add a little thing I call mine Thoughts, Stars and Wishes, which is not a huge innovation. But the idea here is here's what you don't want to do as a GM. You don't want to go, did you guys have fun? Because you're going to get nothing useful back. You also don't want to go, do you guys have any advice for me? chances are you're not going to get anything. It's because people, generally speaking, are kind, right? They appreciate that you ran the game for them. They don't want to criticize you. And asking for criticism, even though you might want it, it's going to be hard to pull it out of people. What's cool about the idea of stars and wishes is that it gives people a way to criticize you without doing it. Asking for stars, which is what are the moments where everything clicked? Moments when you got lost in the game, where you were watching somebody, you can literally give a star to something you weren't even involved in, right? But just moments that 4 weeks from now, someone says, "Hey, did you play, Forbidden Lands with Craig?" Yeah, and then what's the story you're going to tell, right? What was your star, and what that tells you, especially if you're playing with the same table over multiple sessions, it's freaking gold, because what they're going to tell you is what they loved. And if you're a GM, you're gonna go, I need to do more of that. That's what they enjoyed. That was the joy in the game. So it's my job as a GM to take those stars and do more of that. The next piece is wishes, which is not at the character level, it's at the player level. What are you wishing to happen in the next couple sessions? And this is where the criticism can come in as a secret weapon, because what they're going to say is, I wish that we did more of this, or I really wish that this happens, or I wish that we get an answer to this, or I'm hoping that we get a chance to do this. All of this, again, for you as a GM is gold, because they're telling you, like, this is what I want. So between stars and wishes, you have a roadmap of what you need to think about in the next coming sessions with this team. But even if you're like Guy and running it for different tables, it's still valuable even with a new set of tables, because it's talking to you ultimately about what the strength and weaknesses are of the system and of you as a GM running that system. You're going to suss that out with it. The only other thing I throw in there is the thoughts, and the thoughts I tend to do at a very mechanical level. So what are your thoughts on the game? Is there a mechanic that you liked, or is there a mechanic that you struggled with? What are your thoughts on the game? Not about me, not about how we played with each other, strictly in the book thoughts. So I find that to be extremely valuable. And it's just gold, whether I'm going to be playing with this table again or not. Even if I'm going to be playing a different system with a different table, these thoughts, stars, and wishes are going to tell me what I need to think about the next time I run anything.
Yeah. Has that been your experience, Gaz? We've done it a bit, haven't we, in various guises?
Yeah. And I sort of want to be Captain Caveat with it. I mean, I agree with most of what you said there, Craig. All good stuff. Probably, I don't know this cultural thing. It might be different for us, but we're British. And so even more, it's hard to get people to say anything positive or negative, like just anything apart from cheers for the game. Or thanks. Oh, we're getting a sandwich now. And you're like, okay, good. That's the kind of incisive criticism and critique. So yeah, it can be difficult getting people to get stuff. I think the thing I'd add is feedback's hard. It's hard to receive as well as give. So you've got to be open to it. I have had a game that I played where someone wanted stars and wishes, and I gave mine, and then he started arguing about one of them, and I was like, I'm just telling you what. Like, you're not going to convince me to take it back. I'm just telling you what I thought. If you don't like that, that's fine. But don't. We can't have an argument about it, because I'm not changing my mind. It's like trying to tell the bouncer that you need to get into this pub. He's told you you're not getting in the club. You're just not getting in. It doesn't matter how many times you argue. So beware of that, I think, is the thing I would say. Like, if you're asking for feedback, you might get something. You might not agree with it, but that's okay. You don't have to, and you don't have to try and convince the other person. Mm-hmm. Just take them at face value. And you might not take some of that stuff forward to your next game. You might go, okay, for that guy this didn't work, but that's fine. I think it did. And three other people said that was their wishes. So, screw that guy, I'm going to use it. I went to see a comedy gig, Sarah Millican, ages ago, in one of the pubs in Nottingham. It's got this really tiny bar upstairs where you can hold about 12, 15 people max, and big names will come there and do this new stuff to see if it works or not. And she tried a gag, and she's on television, she's a big star. Tried a gag, no one laughed. There was a bit of meh around and she's like, well, screw you guys. I thought that was gold. I'm going to use it anyway. And that's the kind of attitude you need to have sometimes. Is you might think you're flying high, you think the game went great. Your players might not give you that same feedback, but you think, no, that's right, I'm going to try it with a different group of players. They might like it.
Yep.
And the more positive thing you can get out of it sometimes is I'm very critical of myself more than anyone, really. People might not realise, because I'm critical of other things as well, as I've mentioned. sometimes you can get a lift yourself when you ask people the questions and you think that didn't work though, did it? That mass battle went on a bit long, and everybody around the table goes, no, that was the best bit, that was great, I loved it, because we did this and did that, and start talking about the different things that different people have done around the table as you've discussed. And so you can give yourself a boost as well. Apart from anything else, you can get yourself a lift from just, having that discussion with people.
Yeah, I've my experience of it is, I've occasionally you'll get like the big hit around the table will be, the shopkeeper with a funny hat. Something that you've given no thought to at all, that you just made up on the spot, and they're like, "Oh, I love that. It's really good." Like, oh, right.
But then he's in the game then forever, isn't he? If you run that scenario again,
he's always got
with the hats, isn't it?
I think, one technique that I've tried when I do it is, again, to ask for it and then really, really try hard to not say anything.
Yes.
Until everyone has spoken.
Yes.
And then I'll give mine, because I'm a bit like, well, this is what I think as well, and this is. But it's so easy to get into a discussion about it, and I think, like you said, Gaz, some players will want to start that discussion instead of giving feedback, because it's easier to have a chat about it and moderate your own opinion than to actually give that feedback. And like you say, you don't have to take it with you don't have to not do it. It's really useful, I find. But it was particularly when sort of lockdown happened and we were doing loads of online one shots. It's just really hard to. I always do it there, because you're ending a 3-hour game with 4 people that you've never met and won't see again, and you're all going to go downstairs and make a cup of tea. Like, it's just a weird way to end the sort of session without having right, let's just quickly talk about what just happened, like we do at the bar in a convention, or like we do as we're clearing up at a convention. Because online play, you don't get that. Everyone just logs off, and it can, I think as a GM particularly, you can feel a bit like, all right, that was it. You suddenly come down to like nothing, and you've been performing for all these people for a while. But yeah, really powerful tool actually, Stars and Wishes, I think. And it, like I say, it can inform your future games with that system, with other tables, with things like that. Something I've tried to be more conscious of is running the same scenario multiple times.
Yes.
So, prepping it, running it, and then running it again, and then seeing what it is. If not the same scenario, same pre-gens. Because obviously that's usually the least exciting part of prepping your session, is to make those pre-gens. So reusing those and seeing how they work and tweaking how that works. Lots and lots of ideas from there. As I say, we're getting close to time, I think. So maybe if we just give some final thoughts.
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna mess you up, because I got one other thing that popped in my head. Now, keep in mind, not everybody is a big deal streamer like Guy, right? Not everybody does this by default, but it's huge. It's one of the biggest things I have found valuable when I've started broadcasting my stuff, is having a recording of my play. So for those of you that aren't streaming and, you're not broadcasting your games, which is the vast majority of play that's happening right now, I highly encourage, and obviously you want consent from everybody there, record your games, because, when you're a GM, you are spinning plates and you're not taking in all of the information, and you're hearing everything for the first time. You're trying to stay on your toes, and you're triaging information and trying to keep there's a lot going on. I can't tell you how much I've improved as a GM because I have the luxury of going to my YouTube channel and watching my games again. And one of my big things that I've doing now is whenever I've got a new session coming up, like session 5 of something, going back and watching the last 30 minutes or 45 minutes of the previous session is so valuable, because and this isn't just, from a technique and remembering what the hell happened because I wasn't taking notes, but also watching where your players engaged and where they really leaned in. And you don't fully get that until it's over. In the moment, it's hard to take that in. It's why Stars and Wishes is valuable. But I also think, if you've got a bunch of polite Brits that you're playing with, to Gaz's point, they'll reveal their Stars and Wishes in play, and having those recordings, it will level you up. So I just highly recommend, for those of you that, playing online, record the play as long as everybody's good with it. Even locally at the table, set your phone recorder on. It's been just so valuable for me as a player and as a GM.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know whether people get highway hypnosis, but I do that when I've been driving on the motorway and then, 30 miles have gone and I don't remember being there. I've had a little bit of that in games where I've been editing after we've run a game. And some bits, I remember the highs, when we're all laughing at something, all the rest of it. And some things happen, I think, I don't remember this. And I can see my face there. I was definitely doing stuff and I was engaged with the game. But the thing that this player's just said and done, which got a good reaction, I don't even remember it happening. But I was definitely there. I've got video evidence. Yeah. So. Yeah, definitely. Like looking back, I'll just add one last tip then. I think another thing for the end of the game, I might have stolen this off you guy originally, I can't remember, but I mean, supplementary tip is play as many different games with as many different people as you can.
Yes.
So that you'll just pick up all kinds of like stuff that you want to use and tips and tricks and stuff like that. So that's definitely a thing. Like these people online are like, I've been playing games for 40 years, and you look and they've been playing D&D with the same 5 people for 40 years. That's not as valuable as spending 1 year playing 6 games with a bunch of different people, honestly. But the end of session thing, before the actual end of session, while you're still in character, a good thing that we do quite often is ask the players what happens to their character. And you say, it could be straight after, it could be an hour, it could be a day, it could be a year.
Yes.
Do a little epilogue. Tell us what happens to your character. And that's quite often where you get the most creativity, because people have just spent 3 or 4 hours with that character and they've got a sense for how they are now. And through play, they've learned something about them. And they'll quite often be mean to the character or come up with something, quite filled with pathos or something else, or just humorous. But rather than just, like you say, at the end of the session, everybody goes down to the bar, have that just round the table going, you tell us something about your character.
Love that.
And it gives people the chance just to have that pure creativity that's just them. And everybody's listening because everybody wants to know what happened. And
it creates that nice bookend that Guy's been hinting at, right? Of we have a beginning, middle, and now here's the end. I'm a huge fan of that.
You're sort of saying goodbye to the character, aren't you? Because it's that, the thing, I think the reason why some people don't like one-shots, because there are a few games that are like, I don't see the point of them. I want to play for like 6 years with the same characters, or not at all. Part of it is that you don't get that sort of closure on it, where, I mean, if you mirror it, start with a little montage scene of them doing something cool, previous adventure, end with a little epilogue. You've got a little story arc then for your character then. Pro tip, if you want to run the same system later, you can always do it after that adventure and call back to it as well. Then if you get the same players, or you get the same, or they come back to it, there's a little sort of link to it. I did this. These 6 adventures in Mouse Guard were basically a one-shot campaign. Different players played them all.
Nice.
But we had session 2 is, you all escaped from this weasel prison like 3 months ago. Now it's fall. You've got to go back and rescue the rest of the people there. And sometimes you get the same players, sometimes you don't. But that verisimilitude of it being part of a wider story still carries through, even if you've got a different group of people at the table, because it feels like they're part of something bigger from that. I think my final thought would be a bit like Gaz said about play lots of games, but also play games that you don't think you'll like.
Yes.
Play games that you don't think you'll be into. I'm trying to sign up to like OSR type things and get some convention gaming OSR stuff, because it's not my style at all. I don't really believe that I'll ever become someone who runs lots of OSR stuff at conventions, but I'm sure I'll get stuff from it. I'm sure I'll learn from different sort of things from that.
Yep.
And even if, and obviously we're going to say all convention games are amazing. Every GM comes as prepared as we are, and you'll get that. Even the convention games that you go to and it falls flat and you don't necessarily have that great a time for those 3 hours, you'll still get little gems from. You'll still get. I can't remember the number of times that I've played a game for the first time and actually not really enjoyed the one shot that much because of some choices the GM's made largely, but really wanted to run it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it hits on lots of the stuff we've talked about today. I played when FFG Star Wars first came out, I played in a one shot of that where literally all the interesting rules weren't used. The GM didn't use the initiative system, which is really cool. Like, it didn't use, there was something about force powers, it didn't use the force dice either. Like I've missed all this out because it's too complicated. I didn't really enjoy those 3 hours, but I was like taking notes. I was like, I'm definitely going to run this.
Yeah.
This game's actually really good, despite my experience now. This is going to be really good when I run it. So I think that's my sort of final thing. Play lots of games. Play games you might think you won't like. You'll get lots of stuff. It's sort of a muscle you need to practice, and playing practices it as much as GMing does. I might have mixed matched a little bit there. It's not. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. And Craig, do you have any final thoughts?
Well, and this is going to ensure that you guys will never invite me back, because I'm going to do like another post-credit tip, right, that I just thought about. And this is something that's relatively new, and it's tied to the epilogue. It reminded me when we were talking about the epilogues, because I've been using those for a while, Gaz, and they are extremely valuable, especially to Guy's point. It's a way to say goodbye. It's a way to put a formal end. So something new, and I got this idea from the Last Airbender RPG, and when I run Outgunned, you're going to see me use this, and I really am super jazzed about this technique, and I call it the prequel discussion. And the Guy, you hinted at this. So one of the classic things is, why are we all in the tavern? What are we all doing? And what's neat about this idea is that this isn't this is the first adventure of you running this character. This is not the first adventure for this party. And you have kind of a pre-discussion with very explicit prompts. So I'll give you an example in Outgunned. You've got a group of action heroes in a 90s movie. I start off by going, Guy, your character, he saved the day. He defused the bomb last week. I'm curious, though, Gaz, what was it that Guy did that annoyed you? Right. And then, he does that and goes, now, at one point, everything was going to go sideways. We all thought that the last mission was going to fall apart until Sally did what? And what ends up happening is that they build this entire adventure that never happened in a matter of 5 or 10 minutes. And all of a sudden, these characters that they've never been in the skin of before are all together. They're all bonded. They've already got some connections and some bonds with each other. So, and for those of you listening, try that out. Come up with like 4 or 5 prompts for each of the pre-gens that hint at what happened, but give a ton of room for the players to decide what really happened before. And you'll notice that your players will start the game running versus standing around going, why are we even here? So there, now I'm really done.
Excellent. Well, let me put the nail of finality in this then, so we don't keep
Craig's
going, because I'm pretty sure we could all keep going for another few hours. So we'll definitely all get together again, gentlemen, I think, to discuss more tips, tricks, and experiences that we've had. In the meantime, if you're desperate for more information, definitely go and look at Third Floor Wars. Craig does an excellent actual play series, and he's got a tabletop podcast, all that kind of stuff. You should all check out mine and Guy's Unconventional GMs, where we play a variety of different games. Things like Starforge, for example, we've mentioned. That's one of our best videos. A lot of people not quite sure how to play it. Well, there you go. There's 2 hours of your life well spent watching that. Also, of course, if you want to see some of the adventures that Guy comes up with that he's talked about, you can go to the Burn After Running RPG blog. Not Burn After Running, which is just about a runner, but make sure you put the RPG bit in as well. And of course, there is many years of What Would the Smart Party Do, which includes guests such as Craig, guest hosts such as Guy, and a myriad of other industry luminaries, advice, reviews, and walkthroughs. A whole cornucopia of RPG content for you. And we look forward to speaking to you again soon. Do let us know in the comments if there's something you particularly enjoyed. If you've got some top tips, do like, subscribe, all the rest of it. If you want a cash-free way of helping out small content creators, just spread the word and let people know how much you enjoyed this episode.